So you've got a lot of decisions to make with Godtear. And layered over these decisions is the fact that for the missions, they're dynamic. They're always changing. Those piles of tiers are increasing, decreasing, moving, deploying, redeploying. It's not just here are the 4 points on the table, battle over it, and at the last moment, see who wins. There's a lot of flow back and forth. And within this flow is the fact that while you have the different warbands and the focus that they bring to the table, synergy is massive. Even if you're playing one skirmish, playing one warband, there's some important synergy there. Are you utilizing the followers correctly? How are you utilizing those followers? And of course, that multiplies if there's 2 or 3. And we've even played 4 warbands. On a side note, and we explored this, I pushed up to the Godtear playlist, breaking the rules and playing Godtear with beyond 3 warbands and multiple opponents. Yes, the game isn't quite set up for that tactically, but I find the rule set so robust and so strong that going outside of the basic parameters for Godtear, it works. It works. So I've played a number of Godtear games where it would be me and my friends setting things up. Some friends come over. They're like, hey, what's this game? Wow, these miniatures are amazing. Like, what are you fighting over? This looks really, really cool. And exploring those different things, my number one rule, the number one Fritz rule is everyone has a place at my table. If you're interested in checking the game out, let's play around. Pick a warband. See what happens. So we've played numerous games where we have 2 players on each side. We're each controlling 2 warbands. Pushing that out. Playing it. Absolutely. So I say this because given all of the decisions and the synergies you have to make, Godtear takes that to another level in that it gives every warband a one-use ultimate power. And that ultimate power does many things, of course, depending on the flavor, depending on the color of your powers. It might give you more attacks if it's a Slayer. It might give you some more movement, or perhaps doing something out of phase, like being able to make a claim phase at any point in the game. So what we see with that framework, when do you use your ultimate power? And the great thing about Godtear is I can't say an absolute, right? Certain war games that are you go, I go, and don't have synergies, you can say, well, this is what you want to do turn 3, or this is what you want to do mid-game. This is where you want to be end game. Godtear follows that to a certain extent, but at the same time, I need to be open because dynamically it changes every single moment. It is constantly evolving and constantly changing. So what are some of the examples of when we want to use that? First time is to break all the rules and be very, very aggressive. Use it round 1. Use it round 2. Now, the other interesting thing we see about Godtear is you don't just win or lose the game. As you go through, each round is worth a different amount of points. So if you build a list where I'm going to excel early in the game and stack points, I could possibly counter that by making a push for the middle or the end of the game. If I have some bad dice rolls or I make some tactical mistakes in any one round, I'm not eliminated from the game. There's nothing worse than playing a war game for 5 or 6, or a skirmish war game, 5 or 6 turns, and you realize just turn 2, I messed up. Look, I made some mistakes. The dice weren't as great. I'll just blame it on the dice. But I can't come back because I've lost too much. I'm too far behind and my opponent's won. Godtear's not like that. It shifts and it changes. So one tactica with the ultimate is let's just burn that turn 1. Let's kind of go for the alpha strike, cause as much damage as we can, claim as much as we can, and win turn 1. Win those battle points or battle point turn 1. Now, is this the most optimal? Round 1 is only worth 1 point. It's just the opening of the game. Battle's just begun. But in addition to that, if you're going to use your ultimates turn 1, yes, absolutely. End goal, primary goal is win the round. But I want to cripple my opponent in that if I can use my ultimates and take out followers, right? Remove above normal followers, henchman, minion, whatever we're going to call them. If I can cripple or manipulate the tier piles, if I can cripple or manipulate my opponent's champion, not only win the round, but cause so much damage in that turn with the ultimate that now my opponent's faced with a choice. Redeploy position, or bring back henchmen, bring back followers, burn those action points, which weakens them for turn 2 to get up to full strength, or maybe even turn 2 or turn 3. Bring them back, but spend those action points. Or don't bring them back, but now they're at a model, literally models, miniatures, disadvantage. So turn 1 ultimate is not just about winning the round. Well, that's the focus. It's about, can I cripple and do some serious damage? Okay, turn 2. Do we burn off the ultimates at this point? If your ultimates do damage, do a tremendous amount of damage, because remember, we only got one pop-off at this. So you've got this synergy, you've got the mission, you've got all these things going on. You're looking for the opportunity to pop that off, to not only win the mission, but position yourself, right? Godtear is 2 things. Win the mission, but then position yourself for the next turn to be at a material advantage or a deployment advantage or a tier pile advantage. So popping it off turn 2, it's still somewhat similar. I'm looking to win the round, and I'm looking to deal a tremendous amount of damage. So now we get to turn 3, and I find this is where most people will want to pop off the ultimate, and I find myself, this is where I will most of the time pop off my ultimates. So as we move from turn 2 to turn 3, on my side of the game, I have to be asking myself, okay, my opponent is going to pop off their ultimates. Like, I don't want to be around, or whatever their ultimates might be. How can I minimize the effects? Likewise, how can I maximize the effects of my ultimate? So that's where we start really analyzing and asking those questions. I find at this point, turn 3 ultimates, if it's a very aggressive game of Godtear, there's not as many followers on the table. Talk about target priority, followers versus champions. There's not a lot of followers on the table. Either they've been eliminated, or they've been, I don't want to say sacrificed, burned, used up, right? Some of the champions will sacrifice a follower to have an effect or do something. So one way or another, either they've been removed through the dice or they've been removed for Tactica. There's less on the table. At that point, I want to start focusing ultimates on champions, because round 3 is when I want to get the most points. If I can kill champions, I've got +4 on the battle scale. If I'm a Slayer, I've got the bonus points from it. I've also put my opponent in a position where if they want to bring their champion back, they've got to burn a resource, they've got to burn a turn to get them back up. I don't necessarily want to focus on followers. Now, does that change if I'm a yellow and there's a whole group of my opponent's followers? Yes, there's no absolute rule. But I find turn 1 and turn 2, I'm focusing on followers to get the points. Turn 3, it starts to shift. This is where we see the ultimate pop off most of the time. When we get to later turns, the focus is on the champions because a lot of followers have been removed out of play, just littering the battlefield. But at the same time, at this point, while it is possible to come back in the game, the points really start to shift from that mid-turn. So I would say later turns of turn 4 and 5, at that point, the ultimates I don't think are going to have as big effect because there's not as much stuff on the table. You're down to most likely your champions, and you might want to be utilizing for that final push of points, the guaranteed stuff, the primary attacks, and utilizing those over the ultimates. There's also less on the table to possibly affect, right? Early on in the game, if we're playing 3 warbands and I'm in a central position to use my ultimate power, I've got 3 different targets, or I've got 3 different areas that I can affect, right? 3 different warbands. If we're in the later edge of the game, there's not as much stuff on the table, so there's less to affect. But I could counter that and say, I keep the ultimate in the back pocket, ready to pull out, ready to deploy, so this way, if I if the game shifts midway and I am behind on battle points and I'm like, look, I got to win turn 4 and I got to win turn 5 to pull this off. Having that ultimate in that regard works out very, very well. So we've got this different framework. And that's the great thing about Godtear, being able to look and say, when do I utilize this? But be open to other opportunities, because you never know when an opportunity is going to present itself with this game. It doesn't follow just kind of the usual script of, okay, turn 1, it's a you go, I go, so I want to utilize the alpha strike, which means I fire everything, I attack with everything, I cripple all your models, you can't come back. Okay, turn 3 is the midpoint of the game, so I want to use my ultimate power here to bank on those points. There's some things you can do, but there's always counters to it in Godtear, and there are always other opportunities to see how and when it happens. Be ready, have a plan, and follow up when you use that ultimate power.